The night split open with a roar of magic, and Ethan Hale gritted his teeth as he staggered through the burning ruins of his workshop. Sparks showered from shattered glass, painting his pale face in furious amber. He muttered, "I built these wards to keep the world safe, not to destroy it," though his voice broke as if he had betrayed himself. Firelight danced across his trembling hands, etched with alchemical runes that had failed him. From the shadows, Seraphina Vale stepped forward, her dark cloak torn, her eyes shimmering with grief. She whispered, "They were always watching, Ethan. They took everything because of me." His heart twisted, torn between rage and devotion, and he stumbled closer, choking. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me I didn't love a lie." She reached for him, trembling, the flames reflected in her tear-streaked cheeks, but behind her, a cruel silhouette lingered in the smoke. The villain's voice slithered like poison. "Love is weakness, Ethan. She belongs to me now." The storm of fire swelled, and the air grew thick with the shattering weight of betrayal. Ethan stumbled into the rain-soaked streets, the flames of his ruined workshop crackling behind him like the last echoes of his past. The storm drenched him, yet the fire in his chest raged hotter, refusing to die. He whispered, "I swore to protect, but I failed them all." Seraphina followed at a distance, her cloak heavy with rain, her eyes haunted by secrets she could not speak. He turned, his voice sharp with fury and grief. "Why were they here for you? What truth did you hide from me?" Her silence screamed louder than thunder, and in it, Ethan felt the world split. Lightning slashed across the sky, revealing smoke rising like a funeral pyre, and for the first time, he saw himself not as a master of alchemy, but as a man undone by love and betrayal. The storm swallowed the silence until a low laugh slithered through the alley, and Ethan froze, knowing the sound was not of this world. From the shadows emerged Lucien Draemir, his rival and tormentor, with eyes like shards of crimson glass. He said, "Your power is wasted on sentiment, Ethan. She was always mine to claim." Rage tore through Ethan's chest, and he stepped forward, fire sparking faintly in his hands despite the rain. Seraphina gasped, her voice trembling. "Don't listen, he twists everything." But Lucien's smirk carved deeper wounds than any blade, and Ethan realized the fight had already begun long before tonight. Ethan's breath came fast, the storm pounding his skin like fists, yet his focus sharpened on Seraphina's trembling form. She stepped between him and Lucien, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this, Ethan. My past followed me here." His heart ached at her words, torn between trust and betrayal. Lucien chuckled darkly. "She's the key, fool. And she chose long before you." Ethan's fury surged, flames igniting despite the rain, illuminating his anguish. For a heartbeat, Seraphina looked at him with eyes filled with love and regret, and he knew this night would mark them forever. The clash erupted in blinding force as Ethan lunged forward, flames roaring through the storm, striking against Lucien's whirling shadows. The air cracked with thunder and magic, the street splitting under their fury. Seraphina screamed, "Stop! This will destroy you both." But neither man yielded. Ethan felt his heart pound like a war drum, every strike fueled by betrayal and love, yet every glance at Seraphina left him weaker. Lucien sneered, "Your heart will be your ruin." And in that moment, Ethan knew he was fighting not only for survival, but for the fragile thread of love that still bound him to her. Dawn bled into the rain as Ethan Hale trudged toward the river market, every step a vow to stop running. He carried the scent of ash like a curse that would not wash clean. "If there is a way back, I will find it," Ethan said, steady but hollow. Seraphina Vale kept pace beside him, eyes guarded as if truth might shatter in daylight. She said, "There is a witch who taught my mother to hide from men like Lucien." The name cut the morning thin and brittle like glass. Ethan tasted iron, a memory of failure and smoke. "Then we ask her to teach me to win," he said, lifting his chin. Stalls opened like tired eyes, and the market awoke in clinks and murmurs. A hooded woman watched them from a spice tent, thick with cardamom and steam. "You bring storm into a place of trade," she said, voice old and patient. Seraphina bowed, and fear moved like a shadow between them all. Helena Myrren led them into a shuttered back room, where jars hummed with trapped light. She traced sigils on the table that glowed like waking embers. "Alchemy binds what love unbinds," Helena said, eyes measuring Ethan's scars. Ethan steadied his breath and said, "Then I will learn to bind without breaking." Seraphina watched the light crawl across his hands like forgiveness hunting a home. Helena placed an iron ring on the wood and said, "This circle wards the heart if the heart allows it." The air tightened until the floor creaked. Ethan whispered, "Teach me to let power pass through, not burn." Helena nodded and pressed his wrist to a glyph. Pain rose, sharp, clean, and true. "You cannot win with rage," Helena said, "but you can aim it." Seraphina said, "Aim it at the man who thinks I am a debt." The room settled like a wound deciding to clot. Training began with breath, not flame, and the lesson humiliated Ethan more than pain could. Helena counted softly as incense coiled like gentle serpents. "Hold until the fire sleeps," Helena said, palm hovering over his sternum. Ethan said, "The fire does not sleep when she is near." Seraphina flushed, and the room trembled with unspoken maps of desire and dread. "Then learn to name the heat as yours," Helena said, "not as hers, not as his." Ethan inhaled until his ribs ached, and the runes dimmed to an obedient pulse. "Again," Helena said, and her voice was a bell. The iron ring warmed under his palm, bright as a promise. "I will not be ruled," Ethan said, each word steadier than the last. Seraphina said, "Then, neither will I." Outside, rain braided into sunlight like truce threading a scar. The peace cracked when a laugh like broken crystal slid under the door. A boy ducked inside, dripping river water and bravado. "Name's Rowan Pike," he said, grin sharp as a hook. "You two owe the ferrymen for last night's mess." Ethan blinked, stunned by the audacity and by the quick clever light in the boy's eyes. Seraphina said, "We will pay what we can." Rowan whistled and said, "Coin is dull, stories pay better." Helena's brow lifted, but her mouth hid a fond smile. "If you stay, you work," Helena said. Rowan bowed low and said, "I polish jars and trouble in equal measure." Ethan almost smiled, and the room breathed easier. Outside, gulls argued with the wind like old friends who could not quit. They gathered at dusk on the river steps, the city turning gold while the water darkened like a secret. Helena set a bowl afloat, herbs and salt whispering as they dissolved. "We name what hunts us," Helena said, voice low and steady. Ethan said, "Lucien Draemir." The water puckered as if the name had teeth. Seraphina said, "He wants the key my mother hid." Silence took a breath that none of them owned. Rowan said, "Keys want locks. Locks want maps. I like maps." The bowl drifted toward a black eddy like a plan finding gravity. "Then we set wards on love and traps on pride," Helena said. Ethan reached for Seraphina's hand and did not tremble. "We do this together," Ethan said. Night took the river and kept its promise to keep moving. Morning fog clung to the river like breath held too long as Ethan Hale traced words into wet stone. Helena Myrren said, "Bind the intent, not the fear." He answered, "Fear is faster." Seraphina Vale stood near, voice soft, "Then let love be faster." The glyph flashed, then stuttered out like a cough. Rowan Pike winced and said, "If it sparks again, I am diving." Ethan swallowed pride with rain and tried once more. He whispered, "Through me, not from me," and the mark steadied. Helena smiled, tired and proud. "Now step away or scorch your hope." Ethan met Seraphina's gaze and felt the world tilt toward a future he did not yet deserve. The ward held until laughter bled through the fog like rust in water. Lucien Draemir's voice coiled from the opposite bank, "Teach him to beg, not to bind." Ethan's jaw locked as the river swallowed the insult. Seraphina said, Ignore him. Finish the circle. Helena murmured, he wants your hand to shake. Rowan said, he wants your head to turn. Ethan drew the last line, and the ward pulsed like a heart that had learned a name. Lucien's smile cut the distance, and he said, names are doors. Ethan replied, then you can stay outside. The fog shivered as if the river itself approved the defiance. By noon the market thrummed, yet tension threaded the stalls like wire. Ethan bartered for iron filings while Seraphina traced a quiet circle near the spice tent. She said, if he breaks the ward, we fall back to Helena's ring. Ethan nodded, but heard his doubt like thunder behind glass. Rowan slipped between crates and said, two shadows tail us. Helena's eyes narrowed. Then we do not run, we arrange the board. Ethan touched Seraphina's wrist and said, stay within reach. She answered, I am not a promise you keep in your pocket. He flinched and breathed, I know, but I am asking anyway. The wind turned, and the market felt like a mouth about to close. The first trap snapped when a crate burst with shadow and knives of cold air. Ethan flung heat in a tight arc, and the blade hissed to steam. Seraphina stepped inside the circle and said, come through me if you dare. Helena's voice struck like a bell. Hold your breath, release on my mark. Rowan hurled salt into the gloom and said, chew on debt, you ghosts. The shadows twisted into a single figure who bowed with theatrical grace. He said, forgive the entrance. Ethan's heart stumbled, Cassian. Seraphina whispered, Cassian Thorn. The fallen hero smiled like a scar learning to speak and said, I came to settle what I broke. Cassian's gaze found Ethan like an apology with ash on it. He said, Lucien owns a piece of my oath, not my soul. Ethan kept the flame small and said, an oath can burn a man hollow. Seraphina's voice thinned. Why now? Cassian answered, because he plans to unbind the river and drown your wards by moonrise. Helena said, then we move first. Rowan breathed, I always wanted a plan that hates sleep. Ethan looked at Cassian and said, if you betray us, I end it. Cassian nodded, tired and earnest. If I betray you, end it. The market resumed its heartbeat, and the day grew a blade's width darker. Night fell heavy as they crossed the marsh road, lantern light trembling against reeds that whispered secrets. Ethan Hale muttered, every step feels borrowed. Seraphina Vale's voice quivered, then pay in courage. Rowan Pike laughed nervously. I've only got coin in trouble. Helena Myrren said, silence, the shapeshifter listens. From fog rose a figure cloaked in shifting hues, face rippling like a mirror kissed by rain. The stranger bowed low, voice smooth, you summon allies, yet you forget debts. Ethan clenched his jaw, fire sparking in his palm. Cassian Thorn whispered, he changes skins faster than truth. Seraphina said, what do you want? The figure smirked, only to see which mask you wear when the knife turns. They camped near ruined stones where moss ate history. Helena said, here truth must hold or none survive. Ethan asked, truth about what? Cassian's jaw tightened. About me. He unbuckled his coat, scars crossing his chest like maps of betrayal. I swore to Lucien for power, and I stayed for guilt. Seraphina's voice cracked, you left us broken. Cassian nodded, and I returned broken. Rowan whispered, that makes two of us. Ethan clenched fists, flame barely held back. Helena said, if lies remain, words fail. The shapeshifter laughed softly from shadows, then your wards will bleed tonight. The circle quivered as if the earth held its breath. Ethan said, I will not lead if trust dies here. Seraphina stepped forward, voice breaking. Then I speak truth. I knew Lucien long before you, Ethan. He hunted my family because of me. Silence pressed hard. Rowan muttered, that explains the sharp teeth at our heels. Cassian whispered, he bound us all, one way or another. Ethan's eyes burned, not with flame but betrayal. You carried this alone, he asked. Seraphina nodded, tears cutting tracks. Helena raised her staff. Then no more shadows. What you hide, he feeds. The air cracked with the weight of confession. Ethan's runes flared wild, fire snapping uncontrolled, searing stone to glass. Stop, Helena commanded, but rage drowned her words. Seraphina reached for him, whispering, "Don't burn yourself." Rowan cried, "The circle can't hold." Cassian gripped Ethan's arm, snarling, "Harness it or kill us." Ethan fell to his knees, fire spilling from his veins like molten grief. Helena chanted, voice like iron hammer, pressing the magic back. Seraphina pressed her palm to Ethan's cheek and said, "Choose me, not the fire." His breath shuddered, eyes trembling, and for one heartbeat, the flames dimmed to a fragile glow. The fire subsided into trembling coals, and silence draped heavy. Seraphina's tears streaked ash from Ethan's cheek. He whispered, "I nearly lost myself." She said, "You nearly lost us." Cassian looked away, muttering, "Lucien wins if we fracture." Rowan sighed, "Then glue us with humor because I'm terrified." Helena said, "No, glue with resolve. Dawn brings choices." The shapeshifter's laughter curled through the ruins, and dawn brings masks. Ethan rose slowly, fire guttering in his veins, and said, "Then let the mask crack on my terms." The circle dimmed, and above them the stars flickered like uncertain witnesses. Dawn found them among river ruins, where reeds clutched the stones like pleading hands. Helena Myrren drew a circle of chalk and sea salt that hummed like memory. She said, "The key is not an artifact, Seraphina Vale. It is your living heart." Ethan Hale staggered, as if the ground tilted beneath his faith. Seraphina whispered, "My mother hid me inside the lock." The wind answered with a thin, grief-bright cry. Helena said, "Your bond is no curse, Ethan. It is the hinge that lets the world turn." Rowan Pike swallowed and looked small inside his patched bravado. Cassian Thorne closed his eyes, as if bracing for a blade. Ethan said, "Then we open, or the river drowns the city." They entered the tide vault beneath the quay where water spoke in echoes. Helena lit 3 lamps that burned with blue cores like kept promises. "The binding demands 2, Helena said, voice iron steady. "A conduit and an anchor." Seraphina said, "If I am the key, what are you asking me to lose?" The lamps hissed as if shamed by the question. Ethan said, "Take mine instead." Helena's gaze did not soften. If Ethan anchors, his fire may never belong to him again. Rowan whispered, "I dislike every option." Cassian said, "You will need a third hand to cut the thread if it chokes." The vault waited like a throat about to swallow. Cassian's confession fell like a gate that finally gave way. He said, "I carried Seraphina's name to Lucien Draemir once, to buy a broken oath an hour longer." Ethan Hale stared, as if measuring a wound for stitching. Seraphina's breath left her in a trembling line. "You traded my life for time," she said. Cassian bowed his head. "And have paid it back every day." Helena said, "Debt remains a circle until someone steps out." Rowan muttered, "Then let us step or be stepped on." Ethan said, "You will stay at my side until the river calms, and if your courage fails, I finish it." Cassian nodded like a man handed a blade and a chance. Helena spread maps and vials on a damp plank, and drew a line that cut the city like a scar. "Lucien means to unbind the river at moonrise," she said. "If we bind first, he starves." Ethan Hale said, "I anchor." Seraphina Vale gripped his sleeve. "Then I conduit, and the key lives where it began." Rowan said, "I prefer plans with fewer heroic verbs." Cassian said, "I take the outer ring and keep his knives busy." Helena's voice softened for the first time. "The price will not be shared equally." Ethan said, "Then I will take more." Seraphina answered, "No, we carry it together, or it carries us away." The river darkened toward evening, and a hush fell that did not feel like peace. Lucien Draemir stepped from the far arch with a smile shaped like a verdict. He said, "Trade, little alchemist, your flame for her key." Ethan Hale did not move. Seraphina Vale said, "You cannot bargain for what you never earned." Lucien's eyes flashed, "Iron by taking." Rowan Pike breathed, "Terrible motto." Cassian Thorne slipped to the flank like a loyal shadow at last. Helena Myrren lifted her staff and said, "Choose now, and let the river keep the truth." Ethan said, "We bind on our terms." The water shivered as if listening for its name. Moonrise poured silver into the tide vault, as wards woke like hawks. Ethan Hale stood at the anchor mark and let the river breathe through him. He said, "Through me, not from me," and the flames steadied to a clear tone. Seraphina Vale stepped into the conduit circle and met his gaze like a vow that remembered its first word. She said, "Hold fast to love, and I will open the lock." Helena Myrren raised her staff and counted the pulses like a surgeon of storms. Rowan Pike whispered, "If I faint, pretend it is strategy." Cassian Thorne slipped to the perimeter and tested the dark for knives. Lucien Draemir entered with a smile that preferred endings. He said, "Unbind, little alchemist, or I will teach the river hunger." The water bowed to pressure and begged for a name. Ethan answered, "I name it mercy," and heat braided with tide. Seraphina let the key in her chest turn like dawn finding a window. The vault shook as if a city had decided to live. Lucien slashed the air and shadows hit the wards like wolves finding a fence. Ethan absorbed the impact and bled heat into the circle without a cry. He said, "You break on what we built." Seraphina felt the lock resist with a child's fear and spoke softly to the metal that was not metal. She said, "Open because we will carry you." Helena pivoted and drove a countermark through the floor like a nail made of him. Rowan flung salt and laughter in equal parts. He said, "Choke on thrift, specters." Cassian intercepted a blade and answered with a cut that respected the past. Lucien smiled wider and said, "If love is the hinge, I will tear the door." The river rose in its cradle and showed its teeth. Ethan leaned into the surge and imagined a home that had yet to be built. He said, "Hold with me." And Seraphina held with the steadiness of rain that refuses to stop. The shapeshifter arrived as a reflection that refused to match. Their face became Ethan's, and then Seraphina's, and then none. They said, "Choose a truth, and I will choose a body." Helena hissed, "Choose courage." The figure laughed like glass and split the ward into echoes. Rowan grabbed a fallen lamp and said, "I will not be fooled by a mirror that charges rent." Cassian threw a hook of light that he had no right to know. He said, "I learned this from shame." Lucien clapped as if at a play that had requested applause. Ethan steadied the circle by naming Seraphina as his compass. He said, "Where she stands is north." Seraphina smiled with a grief that had stopped hiding. She said, "Then walk to me." The shapeshifter frowned, as if denied a costume. The echoes died, and the ward remembered its shape. Lucien broke patience and drew on the river with a wound instead of a cup. The water screamed, and the arches shook dust like old prayers. He said, "Kneel, and I will grant you a smaller ruin." Ethan answered, "Stand, and I will give you a smaller god." Fire rose through him like forgiveness that had learned boundaries. Seraphina felt the lock fully turn, and the key settle back into her chest, like a star choosing gravity. Helena shouted the final cadence, and the wards braided tight as ship rope. Rowan marked a laugh that sounded like a promise to live. Cassian took a cut meant for Ethan and did not fall. He said, "I pay now." Lucien threw every shadow he owned. The circle did not break. The river calmed in its bones. The city above remembered to breathe. Silence landed like snow that had learned to be warm. Lucien stood within the sealed ring and tasted defeat with theatrical disgust. He said, "Love is a lever, not a shield." Ethan replied, "It is both when held together." Seraphina stepped to the very edge and did not look away. She said, "You cannot starve what we feed." Helena lowered her staff and let age return to her hands. Rowan exhaled a prayer that pretended to be a joke. He said, "I want soup and 10 years of sleep." Cassian leaned against a pillar and refused to collapse. He said, "I am not finished paying." The shapeshifter watched without a face, and then chose one that smiled. They said, "Tonight you kept one door." The river whispered its thanks in the language of small waves. The city above began to hear it. Dawn rinsed the vault's stone clean, while the river murmured like a tired choir finding pitch. Ethan Hale steadied the last ward and exhaled as if returning a borrowed life. He said, "It holds." Seraphina Vale touched the circle and let relief thread through fear without erasing it. She said, "Then we count the cost, and we pay it together." Helena Myrren lowered her staff and hid a tremor with a teacher's smile. Helena said, "Victory is a patient wound." Rowan Pike scoffed at his own shiver and grinned lopsided to prove a point. Rowan said, "I prefer victories that come with breakfast." Cassian Thorne tied a bandage and refused gratitude like a man who still owed the dawn. Cassian said, "Keep moving, or the night remembers us." Above, the city woke as if surprised to be alive. They climbed to the quay, where river fog thinned into pale honey. Stalls reopened with the stubborn dignity of markets that have seen worse. Helena Myrren traced a blessing in the air that smelled of rosemary and iron. Helena said, "Hold what you saved and it will hold you." Ethan Hale watched boats nose the current and felt his fire settle like a candle that had learned its glass. Ethan said, "I will not burn what I love." Seraphina Vale met his gaze and let a tired smile unspool. Seraphina said, "Then love will not fear your hands." Rowan Pike jingled a few coins and made them sound like a parade. Rowan said, "Breakfast is destiny." Cassian Thorne stood on the edge of the crowd as if he were still negotiating with the day. Cassian said, "One more errand before ease finds us." The shapeshifter waited where the quay met the alley, wearing a face that did not threaten to be anyone else. They said, "A door closed below, so another opens above." Ethan Hale kept his voice level while truth tested the air. Ethan said, "Which side are you on?" The shapeshifter tilted their head like a coin deciding its face. The shapeshifter said, "On the side that paid the least blood." Seraphina Vale stepped closer with gentleness sharpened by need. Seraphina said, "Then stand with us until paying ends." Helena Myrren studied the stranger as if reading a book that could read her back. Helena said, "Loyalty can be practiced." Rowan Pike winked because he wanted the world to believe in second tries. Rowan said, "And graded." The shapeshifter smiled and chose to keep the smile. They returned to the river steps at dusk to weigh what the day had spared. Ethan Hale placed a small vial of clear water on the stone, as if returning a borrowed name. Ethan said, "No more bargains with flames." Seraphina Vale laced her fingers with his, and let the silence crown the vow. Seraphina said, "No more running from what we are." Helena Myrren leaned against the rail and allowed herself the smallest, truest sigh. Helena said, "Students graduate by surviving." Rowan Pike sketched a map that led nowhere in particular and kept drawing anyway. Rowan said, "For when we want to get lost together." Cassian Thorne stood a step lower, the river licking his boots like forgiveness rehearsing. Cassian said, "I will make amends until the current gets bored." Night draped the city in velvet that remembered smoke, but chose stars. Lucien Draemir stared from within a sealed ward in the lower vault, his fury banked like coals denied air. Lucien said, "Doors close, but hunger waits." His voice could not find them. Above, Ethan Hale and Seraphina Vale walked the quay where wind stitched their shadows into one. Ethan said, "I feared my power more than I feared losing you." Seraphina said, "Then fear has learned a better lesson." Helena Myrren paused behind them and let them go forward without a net. Helena said, "Some doors should stay open." Rowan Pike and the shapeshifter argued softly about pie and destiny. Rowan said, "We can have both." The river kept its promise and carried the city into tomorrow,